The jungle sang with 1,000 voices, but every alien ear was tuned to one sound only, the bone-rattling growl that echoed through the trees. It wasn't the chirps of insectal wings or the clicks of tiny predators scuttling in the underbrush that made them shiver. It was the guttural, spine-vibrating roar of something much bigger, much hungrier, and much too close. Their group huddled in silence beneath a twisted canopy, quills flattened, limbs trembling, eyes darting in every direction. They were hunters once, or at least thought themselves to be, but here on this cursed planet, they were prey. The growl came again, reverberating through the roots and vines, making the damp soil seem alive beneath their clawed feet. One of them whimpered, a sound cut short when another smacked his mouth shut with shaking fingers. To make noise here was to invite doom. And doom had teeth longer than a soldier's forearm. That was when the human yawned. Yawned. In the thick of this nightmare jungle, with death stalking so close the air smelled faintly of iron and musk, the strange, hairless off-worlder sat against a fallen log, scratching lazily at his stubbled chin as if he were bored of waiting. His species didn't have quills, didn't have claws, didn't even have armor like theirs. He had soft flesh, a messy mop of hair, and the utterly insane composure of someone who had never learned to be properly afraid. "Relax," he whispered, his voice calm, like he was explaining the weather to a child. "It's just circling. It won't strike yet." The aliens stared at him in disbelief, their wide eyes glowing faintly in the low light. His words made no sense. Nothing here circled. Predators here didn't play, they killed. But he wasn't done. "We'll need firewood soon," he added, pushing himself to his feet and brushing dirt from his clothes. "Night's gonna be worse than this." One of the aliens, a wiry scout named Vyr, hissed, mandibles clacking in outrage. "Worse? Worse than that?" He pointed a trembling claw toward the undergrowth, where branches bent unnaturally as the unseen beast prowled. "You would have us make noise?" The human gave a shrug. "Fire's noise. Fire's light. Fire's safety." He tilted his head at the scout, grin flashing quick and unnerving. "Trust me. Beasts hate fire." None of them trusted him, not really. The humans had arrived only weeks before, stranded by accident, and most of the galaxy whispered that their kind were fragile, reckless, half-mad. But the human had walked with them since the crash, and he hadn't died yet. That fact alone made them hesitate. Because anyone who could survive this planet deserved a little attention. The roar came again, this time closer, rattling the broadleaf canopy. Their entire group shrank in unison, pressing into the shadows. And yet the human stood taller, eyes scanning the treeline with what looked suspiciously like anticipation. His name, they'd learned, was Mason. Mason had been a survey technician, one of the lowest castes in human expedition ranks, the kind of worker you assigned to push buttons and check soil samples. He wore no armor, carried no plasma rifle, and yet somehow he had declared himself their, what was the word? Protector. No one had voted for him. He had simply become. Now Mason whistled under his breath, a tuneless sound that made the aliens flinch harder than the predator's growl. Whistling here was insanity. But the predator didn't charge. Not yet. "Look," Mason said finally, crouching to drag a stick through the mud, sketching lines that only he seemed to understand. "We can sit here shaking until it gets dark, and then it'll eat us one by one, or—" He stabbed the stick into the soil with a sharp jab. "We start acting like we own the place. Traps. Spears. Fire. That's how you flip the game." His confidence was so absurd it bordered on insulting. Vyr hissed again. "We are no primitive nestlings. We use plasma. We use stealth drones. We do not scrape wood together like feral animals." Mason leaned back on his heels, smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Yeah? How's that working out for you?" The silence that followed was bitter. Their plasma packs had failed days ago. Stealth drones were shredded by vines before they'd even taken off. Everything technological was dead weight on this planet. The human had known it, somehow, from the first hour. And while they tried to cling to protocol and pray for rescue, He'd spent his nights sharpening sticks and stacking rocks. The predator's shadow slipped across the clearing, vast and unmistakable. For a heartbeat, its scaled snout parted the foliage, teeth like jagged ivory spears glistening in the faint light. One alien nearly screamed. Mason didn't flinch. Instead, he pointed at the beast with a casual nod. See? That thing is muscle, teeth, and instinct. It's predictable. You can be predictable. Beat? Croaked another alien, voice cracking. It is death given form. Death, Mason echoed, chuckling. That's a challenge, not a verdict. And then he did something unthinkable. He snapped a branch from the fallen log and started peeling bark with a knife he'd scavenged from his kit. His hands worked quickly, methodically, shaping the wood into something long and sharp. A spear. The aliens watched in appalled fascination. For them, weapons were elegant things of alloy and plasma, precision crafted by factories, not hacked from jungle detritus. This act looked primitive. Barbaric. But in Mason's grip, the crude weapon gleamed with purpose. The predator shifted again, circling wider, as though uncertain. Mason grinned wider. See? Already it's second-guessing. Predators don't like prey that bites back. The aliens exchanged looks, a silent conversation crackling through the group. Their instincts screamed to run, to burrow, to hide. But this human, they couldn't ignore him. His calm was contagious in the most irritating way. Against every lesson drilled into them since hatchling days, they found themselves gathering sticks too, clumsily imitating his motions. By dusk, they had a pile of sharpened stakes. Mason nodded approval, then motioned for vines. Soon he was weaving snares, showing them how to bend branches into spring-loaded traps that would lash out at anything heavy enough to trigger them. He worked with a rhythm, humming to himself, utterly unbothered by the night pressing closer. When at last he crouched to spark a fire, the aliens panicked outright. "It will see us!" one hissed. "It already does," Mason replied calmly, striking stone to steel. Sparks danced. "Difference is, fire says we're not running." The first curl of smoke rose, then the fragile flicker of flame. The aliens shuddered, expecting the predator to burst from the dark in fury. Instead, silence deepened, and for the first time since landing, the beast retreated a pace. Mason leaned back, warming his hands, expression smug. "Told you. Fire's older than fear." The aliens stared into the flames, torn between terror and awe. Around them, the jungle's chorus shifted, uneasy at the intrusion of light. And for a fleeting heartbeat, with their crude spears stacked and the fire crackling, they felt less like prey and more like something else. Something dangerous. But the predator wasn't gone. Its growl rumbled faintly in the distance, promising it would return. The fire was only the beginning, and Mason knew it. He looked at the wide-eyed aliens, their scales gleaming in the glow, and grinned like a wolf who had just found a pack. "Tomorrow," he said, "we start hunting it." The aliens froze, disbelief written in every line of their bodies. Hunt it? The idea was madness itself. And yet, madness seemed safer than waiting to be eaten. The night thickened. The fire popped and hissed. The predator circled, frustrated but patient. And in that strange glow, on a planet that wanted them dead, something shifted. Because for the first time, the aliens realized they weren't hiding anymore. They were planning. And it was all because of the human who thought spears, traps, and a campfire could turn prey into predators. The first scream came just before dawn. It wasn't human. It wasn't alien. It was something else, something massive, strangled with fury, and pierced with pain. The sound rolled through the canopy like thunder, shaking dew from the leaves and silencing the night chorus in an instant. Every alien in the camp bolted upright, quills bristling, eyes wild. Their fire had died down to glowing embers, but even in the dim light, they could see Mason's grin spreading ear to ear. "Trap worked," he said simply, as if announcing the weather. The aliens gaped at him. "Worked?" Something out there had screamed like the jungle itself was dying, and the human's response was worked. Viwire, shaking so badly his limbs rattled, hissed, You baited it? Mason shrugged, grabbing one of the sharpened spears he had lying neatly at his side. Didn't bait it. Just set snares where it likes to stalk. Beasts are predictable. He rolled his shoulders, entirely too casual. Means it's bleeding now. Means we've got time. Time for what? Croaked one of the smaller aliens. Mason's grin widened. To get serious. The aliens whispered among themselves in a flurry of clicks and hisses, fear mingling with something else they hadn't felt in days, a spark of grim hope. The predator wasn't invincible. It could be hurt. And somehow this human, this fragile, unarmored primitive, had managed to do it. The jungle wasn't quiet for long. Soon the roars returned, closer now, angrier, each one punctuated by the crashing of trees. The wounded predator was hunting with renewed fury, lashing out at anything in its path. Birds shrieked as they fled. Entire trunks splintered under its rage. Mason listened, eyes narrowed, and then spat into the dirt. It'll come for us direct now. No more circling. We make a stand. A stand. The aliens looked at one another in mute horror. Their instincts screamed for them to scatter, to burrow, to vanish. Standing against that thing was suicide. But Mason didn't give them the chance to argue. He strode into the camp's edge, gesturing sharply for them to follow. VYR, take 3 and get more vines. Strong ones. You 4, sharpen every stake we've got left. The rest of you dig. Dig? One echoed blankly. Pit traps, Mason said. Nasty ones. Spikes at the bottom if you can manage. His tone was brisk, confident, commanding in a way that brooked no hesitation. We're not prey anymore. We're builders. Something in his certainty anchored them. The aliens exchanged another round of doubtful looks, but slowly, haltingly, they obeyed. Their claws raked soil, their quills bristling as they carved pits. Others bent over the firelight, scraping spears against stone until they gleamed sharp. Mason worked harder than any of them, hauling logs, lashing vines, setting sharpened stakes in places only he seemed to envision. His mind ran ahead of theirs, crafting a kill zone out of nothing but sticks and shadows. He spoke as he worked, almost like a teacher. Predators don't think in plans, he explained, wedging a stake into the ground. They think in hunger. They charge, they bite, they thrash. You give them pain where they expect meat, fire where they expect darkness, and suddenly they're not hunting, they're surviving. That's our opening. The aliens listened, some enthralled, others horrified, but none could stop their hands from moving under his command. It was as though his madness was a disease, infectious and unstoppable. The predator's roars drew nearer, each one a reminder that their time was almost gone. The ground trembled with its footfalls. Mason only quickened his pace, sweat dripping down his temple, eyes bright. By the time the canopy split under the monster's bulk, the clearing had transformed. Crude spears bristled from the soil like a field of thorns. Pits yawned half covered with leaves and branches. A wall of sharpened stakes ringed the fire, angled outward in a vicious hedge. Smoke from the rekindled blaze curled upward, carrying sparks into the dawn. And Mason stood at the center of it all, spear in hand, grinning like a man who had invited hell to dinner. The predator burst into the clearing with a roar that rattled bones. It was bigger than the aliens had dared imagine in daylight, scaled hide glistening with dew and streaks of fresh blood from Mason's first trap, jaws lined with serrated teeth that could shear bone in an instant. Its eyes, molten gold and furious, locked onto the cluster of prey it expected to scatter. But they didn't scatter. Mason's voice rang sharp across the clearing. Hold the line! The beasts charged, each step a quake. The aliens shrieked, but their claws gripped spears tighter, their quills raised in reflexive defiance. The predator hit the first row of traps, stakes that drove into its belly. It howled, rearing, thrashing in rage. The ground shook as its tail lashed, sending one of the aliens tumbling into a pit. Mason lunged forward, jabbing his spear deep into the creature's exposed flank. Blood sprayed hot across his arms. He shouted, not in fear but in triumph. See? It bleeds! Keep hitting it! The aliens, half mad with terror, obeyed. Spears jabbed from every side. Some shattered against scales, others sank shallow into joints. The predator roared and snapped, its jaws closing inches from Vyr's head, but the wall of fire forced it back, snarling at the flames it could not comprehend. The clearing became chaos. Dirt flew. Spears snapped. The beast bled, but still it fought, feral and relentless. One alien was snatched in its jaws, scream cut off in a spray of red. Another was crushed beneath its claws. But for every loss, Mason's traps took their toll. A pit trap collapsed under the monster's weight, spiking its leg. Vines snapped taut, lashing more stakes into its hide. The beast howled again, stumbling, bewildered by the pain that came from every direction. And Mason laughed. Laughed in the middle of death, eyes alight with firelight and blood. That's it. That's the game. It doesn't know what to fear more, us or the fire. The aliens saw it too then. The predator was still a nightmare, still death incarnate, but it was no longer untouchable. It was flinching. It was faltering. And in that crack of weakness, something primal awakened in them. They shrieked as one, a chorus of defiance, and surged forward with Mason at their lead. Spears struck again and again, finding flesh. The predator thrashed wildly, crashing into the stake wall and impaling itself deeper. Blood sprayed across the fire, sizzling in the flames. The jungle itself seemed to recoil at the fury of the battle. Finally, with a roar that cracked branches for miles, the beast tore free and staggered back into the tree-line, leaving a trail of blood like spilled paint. It did not die, not yet, but it fled, limping, broken, beaten back for the first time in its reign. The clearing fell into stunned silence. Smoke curled from the fire. Broken spears littered the ground. Alien bodies lay still, too gone forever. And Mason, bloodied and heaving for breath, raised his spear high. "We just made history," he said hoarsely. "We hunted the hunter." The aliens stared at him, wide-eyed, their fear tangled with awe and disbelief. Vyr stepped forward slowly, mandibles clicking. "It ran." His voice trembled. "It fled from us." "Damn right it did," Mason said, grinning despite the blood soaking his arm. "Because now it knows. We're not prey anymore." They stood in the firelight, shaken but alive, and realized that something irreversible had changed. They weren't hiding. They weren't surviving by chance. They were fighting back. And somewhere in the distance, the wounded predator roared again, a promise that this war wasn't over. Mason only tightened his grip on the spear, eyes gleaming. "Good," he muttered. "Round 2 then." The jungle never slept, but for 3 days it felt as though every leaf, every shadow, every trembling branch was holding its breath. The predator had vanished after their brutal stand, limping into the dark with wounds that should have slowed it, maybe even killed it. But no one truly believed it was gone. Not Mason. Each night, as the aliens tried to sleep in shifts, quills brushing nervously in the firelight, Mason sat awake, spear across his knees, eyes fixed on the tree-line. He listened to the jungle in a way none of them could, head tilted, brow furrowed, every muscle coiled like he was waiting for a friend to show up late. And then, on the 4th night, the silence broke. The roar was different this time, hoarser, deeper, scarred by wounds. But it was louder too, filled with rage. The aliens bolted upright, claws scrambling for crude spears, their hearts pounding with the same dread as before. Mason's reaction chilled them more than the roar itself. He smiled. "Took it long enough," he murmured, rising to his feet. "Means it's been watching. Learning. Which means tonight's gonna be fun." The aliens hissed in horror. Watching? Learning? That was worse than any blind rage. If the beast had patience, cunning, then all their crude defenses might crumble in a single strike. "Mason," Vyr croaked, stepping close, quills rattling. "We cannot fight again. We bled too much already. It killed too. If it returns in full strength, then we kill it first." Mason cut him off with that same infuriating calm. He crouched by the fire, feeding it branches until sparks leapt and flames roared higher. Shadows danced across his face, painting him half man, half monster. We can't outlast it. Rescue's not coming. The only way out is through. The aliens shivered. It sounded insane. Yet even their instincts, their deeply ingrained prescience, told them Mason was right. The predator would never stop circling. It would wait, it would stalk, it would bleed them dry one by one until nothing remained. The fire snapped, spitting embers into the night. Mason jabbed a stick into the flames, pulling it free when it caught fire. He brandished the burning torch like a sword, eyes gleaming. We don't wait for it this time. We take the fight to its den. Gasps of disbelief swept the group. To march into the predator's lair was beyond suicidal. Even speaking the thought was madness. But Mason didn't flinch. He stood there with fire in one hand, spear in the other, and the aliens realized something terrible and awe-inspiring. He wasn't suggesting. He was declaring. By dawn, they were moving. The jungle pressed close around them, humid air heavy with the stench of blood and rot. Every step forward was agony for the aliens, instincts screaming to turn back, to dig, to hide. But Mason's steady stride, his unshakable focus, pulled them forward. They followed the trail of devastation the beast had left, trees gouged by claws, earth splintered under its weight, pools of dark blood where Mason's traps had struck true. It was wounded, yes, but not broken. And that made it dangerous in ways they couldn't comprehend. At midday, they reached the ravine. The predator's den gaped at the bottom, a black maw in the earth, ringed by jagged stone and smeared with gore. Bones littered the ground, stripped clean, some longer than a man's body. The aliens froze, quills rattling like dry leaves. Mason only crouched, studying the terrain. He traced the ravine's edge with sharp eyes, then nodded once, satisfied. This'll do. We don't fight it inside. We make it fight us out here. The aliens didn't understand, but they obeyed. Mason ordered vines strung across the ravine, logs balanced on ridges, boulders pried loose and poised on ledges above. He moved like a predator himself, turning the landscape into a death trap. The aliens scrambled to keep up, claws digging, spines trembling. By the time the sun dipped low, their crude siege was ready. Mason stood at the ravine's lip, torch blazing, and roared into the maw below with all the fury his lungs could muster. The aliens nearly collapsed in panic. To announce oneself to the beast was suicide. To invite it, unthinkable. But the roar that answered made their blood freeze. The predator emerged, slower than before, but no less terrifying. Its massive frame was crisscrossed with wounds, its scaled hide blackened with dried blood. Yet its eyes burned hotter than ever, twin suns of hate fixed on the intruders. It climbed the ravine wall in a surge of muscle and rage, jaws wide, teeth gleaming with drool and fury. Mason raised his spear. Now! The first boulder crashed down, smashing into its back. The beast roared, staggering. Logs tumbled, stakes lashed from vines swung like pendulums, tearing new gouges into its flesh. The aliens shrieked their battle cries, hurling spears, firebrands, rocks, anything that would wound. But the predator was not the same beast they'd fought before. It had learned. It twisted mid-charge, tail sweeping like a scythe, snapping logs aside, knocking aliens sprawling. It ducked under a second boulder, leaping upward with horrifying agility. Its jaws snapped shut around one alien, tearing him in half before the others could react. Chaos erupted. The predator hit their line like a storm, claws ripping, jaws snapping. The air filled with screams and blood. Mason fought at the center of it, spear flashing, firebrands searing into scale and flesh. He moved like a man possessed, every strike precise, every dodge fueled by grim certainty. His voice cut through the din, barking orders, rallying the others to press the attack. Hit the legs! Keep it off balance! Don't let it pin you! The aliens obeyed, desperation welding them into a unit. They darted in and out, stabbing, shrieking, striking from angles the beast couldn't cover all at once. For every alien crushed, another scored a wound. And then, with a heave of muscle, the predator slammed Mason to the ground. His spear snapped under its weight. Its jaws opened wide, hot breath washing over him, teeth poised to end him. The alien screamed, frozen in terror. But Mason didn't. He rammed the burning torch into its eye. The beast howled, jerking back, half blinded, thrashing wildly. Mason scrambled to his feet, face blackened with soot, arms slick with blood, and shouted with raw defiance. "See? Even gods bleed!" The alien seized the moment. Spears plunged, vines snapped taut, another boulder crashed down. The predator staggered, pinned between fury and fire, its strength ebbing under the relentless assault. But still it fought. Still it refused to fall. The clearing became an inferno of blood and fire, the ground soaked, the air filled with roars and screams. Mason fought like a man who had never known fear, the aliens like prey who had finally learned the taste of teeth. And as the sun set, painting the sky crimson, the predator stumbled again, its great body sagging. 1 eye was gone, its hide shredded, its blood spilling like rivers. It wasn't dead yet. But it was dying. Mason raised a shattered spear shaft, breathing hard, and met its blazing eye. "One last push," he rasped. "End this." The aliens, trembling and bloodied, lifted their weapons, quills rattling with a sound that was no longer fear but fury. The predator lowered its head, preparing one final charge. And both sides surged forward, into the clash that would decide which species ruled this cursed jungle. The world narrowed to teeth, blood, and fire. The predator barreled forward, massive frame shaking the earth, jaws snapping with murderous intent. Every alien shrieked, every quill bristled, but none broke and ran. They surged alongside Mason, meeting the charge head-on with weapons that were little more than sharpened sticks and blind fury. The collision was like two storms slamming together. Mason ducked under a swipe of its claw, the wind of its passing almost tearing him off his feet. His broken spear shaft drove into the beast's wounded leg, jamming between scales. The predator roared in pain, stumbling just enough for the aliens to swarm it, stabbing, clawing, even biting where they could reach. Their cries were wild, half fear, half exhilaration. The beast thrashed, tail lashing, sending bodies flying. Mason felt the ground vanish beneath him as the tail caught his ribs, hurling him across the ravine. He slammed into stone, vision sparking white, lungs burning as air abandoned him. For a moment the world spun, but through the haze he saw the predator dragging itself forward, determined to crush the line, to devour every last fighter. And something inside Mason snapped. He staggered to his feet, coughing blood, and grabbed a fallen torch from the ground. Fire danced in his eyes as he bellowed across the chaos. "Hold it down!" The aliens, battered and bloodied, looked at him with wide eyes. He made a downward motion with his free hand, shouting louder. "Pin it! Now!" They obeyed. Vines were dragged across its limbs, bodies thrown into the fray, claws digging deep. The predator bucked and writhed, its fury shaking them loose one by one, but just long enough for Mason to climb. He scrambled up its back like a man scaling a collapsing cliff, torch clenched between his teeth, hands clawing at jagged scales. The beast roared, twisting, trying to shake him off. Claws raked his leg, tearing flesh, but he didn't stop. His blood slicked the scales under his grip as he hauled himself higher. At last, he reached the base of its skull. The predator reared, throwing itself against the ravine wall in desperation, but Mason clung on, torch blazing bright. "Fire!" he snarled through gritted teeth. "Beats everything." And with a roar that matched the beast's, he rammed the burning torch deep into its remaining eye. The predator's scream was unlike anything the jungle had ever heard. It wasn't just pain, it was disbelief. For the first time, the king of hunters had been undone not by tooth or claw, but by prey that refused to be prey. It staggered blindly, thrashing in panic, smashing into rocks, tearing at its own face. The aliens scattered to avoid its death throes, some shrieking in triumph, others in terror. Mason was thrown from its back, slamming hard into the dirt. His torch snapped in half, flames sputtering. But he saw the great beast collapse, saw it stumble into the very pit trap they'd dug days before. With a final, earth-shaking roar, the predator impaled itself on a forest of sharpened stakes, its colossal body convulsing before it finally stilled. The jungle fell silent. Smoke from their scattered torches curled into the dark sky. The only sound was the ragged breathing of the survivors. The beast lay still, its titanic form broken, blood soaking the ground in rivers. Mason groaned, forcing himself upright on one trembling arm. His chest burned, his leg throbbed, and blood slicked every inch of him, but he laughed, hoarse, cracked, and wild. "Told you," he wheezed, spitting blood into the dirt. Predictable. The aliens approached the corpse cautiously, weapons still raised. One jabbed it with a spear, flinching when it didn't move. Slowly, the realization sank in. It was dead. Truly dead. The nightmare that had haunted them since the crash, the predator that had stalked their every breath, it was over. V-Wire staggered forward, his mandibles trembling as he looked from the massive corpse to the battered human. "You killed it!" Mason shook his head, dragging himself upright on his broken spear shaft. "No," he rasped. "We did." The aliens froze at that word. We. Not human. Not alien. Not predator and prey. Something new. Something together. And then, one by one, they began to shriek, not in fear this time, but in triumph. Their voices rose high, echoing across the ravine, a primal chorus that made the jungle tremble. They stomped their claws, rattled their quills, pounded their chests. Mason stood in the center of it all, battered and broken, grinning through bloody teeth. When the cries finally ebbed, the aliens turned to him, eyes wide with something he'd never seen from them before: respect. V-Wire stepped forward, lowering his head in a gesture that, in their culture, was reserved for leaders, for champions. "We were wrong about you, human. You're kind. Fragile, yes. Foolish, often. But you are something else." Mason chuckled weakly, wincing as his ribs protested. "Yeah, well. Sometimes fragile things bite back." The aliens didn't laugh. They weren't wired for humor, but something in their eyes shifted. Understanding, perhaps. Or the beginning of it. That night, they built the largest fire yet. Not just for warmth, not just for protection, but as a signal, to the jungle, to the stars, to themselves. They weren't prey. Not anymore. The predator's corpse lay near the flames, its shadow cast long across the clearing. The aliens feasted for the first time in weeks, carving meat from lesser beasts that no longer dared approach. Their voices rang in strange, discordant songs. And Mason sat among them, leg bound in vines, chest wrapped in rough bandages, laughing quietly at the absurdity of it all. He had come to this planet a technician, a man meant to collect soil samples and punch data into a terminal. Now he was something else entirely. Not a soldier, not a leader, but a survivor who had taught aliens how to stop running. When the fire burned low and exhaustion claimed most of them, V-Wire approached, lowering himself beside Mason. His mandibles clicked softly in the firelight. "You made us do what no one of our kind has ever done. You made us stand. You made us kill the hunter." Mason shrugged, poking at the fire with a stick. "Wasn't about killing. Was about living. Big difference." Silence stretched, filled only by the crackle of flames. Finally, V-Wire asked the question that lingered in all their minds. "What will we do now? The jungle is still full of beasts. Rescue may never come." Mason leaned back, staring up at the alien stars. "Then we keep building. More traps. More fire. Maybe even walls if we get ambitious. One predator's gone, but there'll be others. Good thing we've got spears." He grinned faintly. "Good thing we've got each other." V-Wire tilted his head, mandibles twitching thoughtfully. For his species, trust was rare, fragile, hard-won. But in that moment, he knew it had been forged here, in blood and fire, with this insane, stubborn human who refused to hide. The night wore on. The fire dwindled. But no growl came from the jungle, no shadow circled their camp. For the first time, true silence reigned. And when Mason finally allowed his eyes to close, he did so with a smile, knowing the lesson would linger long after him. Fire. Spears. Traps. and the refusal to be prey. The jungle would never be the same.